Thank you very much for having me here. This book was inspired completely, as I mentioned in the beginning of the book, by a trip at UFM that I did last year. Both my close colleague and I, Chris Coyne, we came away from our visit at UFM very inspired, and it has, in fact, continued to excite us in the way that we approach our own efforts to build programs back where we are now. I should step back for a second and just point out something. That's from somebody that teaches at George Mason University. George Mason University is recognized throughout the world as the epicenter of all free market economic activity. And we've had the Nobel Prize winners and the Distinguished Award winners and all that stuff to go with it. But I don't think I've ever seen as much love of economics as exhibited by the people here at UFM. So even someone coming from George Mason University, in which we love economics, you guys really love economics. And so when I left the visit from that, and conversation actually started on the plane with Chris, talking about the idea of sort of bringing out a book that sort of tried to tap into that. And that's what we ended up by doing. The Living Economics, my wife Rosemary is here, and she could tell you we went through all kinds of different titles with this book, none of which the people liked the titles that I came up with. And then they came across this title, and I shared it with my wife, and she says, that's a snappy title. And so we went from there. But the people, sometimes people who are putting the book together physically get a sense of what the author's trying to do more than the author's trying to do. And really, living economics means three different things in here, and the imagery that they picked relates to that. The first one is something Gabrielle mentioned. It's a quote from Ludwig von Mises, who's my favorite economist. I consider him the greatest economist that ever lived, period. Everyone else is second to Mises. All right? So, including Hayek. Hayek is Mises' greatest student. So he's the second good economist out there. And then everyone else is sort of around that. But Mises sort of got it. I will... just so that you don't... It's one of the thrills of my life to be talking in the Milton Friedman auditorium. Milton Friedman I consider to be the greatest communicator of economics. I have so a lot of people that get, so I'm very thrilled to be here in this. But, so Mises has a line which no one tends to ever talk about. It's in the beginning of Human Action. It's actually around page 7, if you want to find it. But he says that critics of economics, criticize economics because it has flaws in it that people are fixing. He says, all that means is that economics is a living body of thought, and to live implies imperfection and the need for change. Economics is a living body of thought. This is one of the things that I wanted to communicate. It's an ongoing scientific discipline, all right, that is constantly needs new generations of people to pick up and explore it. It's the mystery, the central mystery of economics. How does Paris get fed? Why are some nations rich and other nations are poor? These puzzles, these mysteries exist throughout the centuries, and our efforts to try to understand them still should fascinate us. The really big issue with economics, and why people tend to somehow take it for granted sometimes, is because our biggest mystery in a functioning economy is our mundane existence. So when rocket scientists are looking at things, that's something exceptional. How can I take this object and propel it up into the atmosphere, right? In our thing, it's how is it that shoes end up on your feet? How is it that you go to a grocery store and you actually have this array of goods and services that you can pick from, right? It's the mystery of the mundane. So one of the most important things to get across to young people thinking about economics is get them wondering about the miracle of division of labor. All right, the miracle about, the miracle of the price system, as Hayek talks about it. So we need to continually make economics an exciting subject for each generation of students to come along so that they can uncrack these mysteries of the universe around us. So that's the first aspect of living, of economics, ongoing body of thought. But economics doesn't have to be invented. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Science always begins with it rooted in something, and that's rooted, right? That's what the tree is getting at. It's rooted in what I call in this book mainline economics, which I'll describe in a little bit. The easiest way to think about this is imagine that you're a Martian and you come to the Earth in 1200 and someone uses the word economist. What would you think that economist believed? Now, in 1500, 1600, 1700, 1800, 1900, just think about classic criticisms. Charles Dickens, Hard Times, the philosophy of fact. That's the bad guys. That's what economists supposedly believe, these utilitarian philosophers of fact, right? That the bad guys, right? When Keynes decides to attack economics, right? Which he does. That's his whole point. The classical economists. That's what those guys believe. They're swollen, right, in their lockdown minds about these thoughts, these habits of thought, which I have to shake you out of. That's what Keynes' argument is. What does that mean? Well, part of the theme of this book is that what it means to be an economist is recognize scarcity, right? Recognize that in order, if you're living in a scarce world, you're going to have to negotiate those scarcities. And in order to do that, you're going to need signals and incentives to negotiate those, to be able to do that. And that, Adam Smith understood that. J.B. Say understood that. F.A. Hayek understood that. And I'll come back to this in a second. Milton Friedman understood that and knew how to communicate it. All right? And Ludwig von Mises understood it really well. That's why he emphasized the issue of economic calculation, which is a deeper understanding of that problem. So we're rooted in this commonality. In the book, I summarize those as a rational choice postulate and the invisible hand postulate. And the reconciliation of those, not through collapsing one to the other, but through an emphasis on institutional environments within which rational choosers choose. Some institutional environments are more conducive to the invisible hand operating in a benevolent way. Other environments are for unintended consequences to take advantage and, in fact, lead us away from peace and prosperity. So, and the third one, and then again, this is where my wife can attest to this very well, is also living economics means like living economics. Since the moment I got introduced to economics, everything else in life has been ruined for me at some level, right? Mary Poppins, it's about the instability of fractional reserve banking. Right? Right? I want my Toppins and the bank goes on a run, right? It has nothing to do with, parents spending time with their kids or anything like that. It's about fractional reserve banking, And so you see economics in everything, whether or not you're at church or whether or not you're in the supermarket, whether or not you're talking about, the way you interact with your students or the way that you would interact with customers, all right? Every single thing breathes of economics. Daniel Corvo, who's a very, very bright student here, told me, he just, came up to me when I saw him before and he informed me that he's studying psychology here. My first response is, what? Why? Economics. What are you doing? So then I stopped. I realized my better self, Bert. I'm not going to be that obnoxious. And I said, well, are you studying evolutionary psychology? And he says, oh, yeah, we just had it. I go, well, then you're doing economics. Right? And so, right? And so what happens here is that, economics lives and breathes and everything, and it's the way we should approach, the teaching of the subject. If you go to a cocktail party and you tell people, I've always been shocked by this, reaction. I go to a cocktail party, people ask me, what do I do for a living? I say, oh, I teach economics. Their reaction. That's the worst class I ever had. That's one. Two, they might say, oh, where's interest rates going tomorrow? If I knew that, I wouldn't be at your cocktail party. Right? And then, 3, and very rarely 3, only happens at George Mason and UFM. Oh my God, I love economics, right? And so, but I think everyone should have this reaction. Anyone who's exposed to economics should be like, okay, my life is now set, I'm going to study economics. And I've never really quite understood why that's not the case, which again is my mystery that I'm trying to figure out.